Welcome to a special episode of Axe of the Blood God, an independent RPG podcast. I'm your host, Kat Bailey. Joining me, as always, is my lovely co-host, Nadia Oxford.
Hello, Kat. We have a whale of tales today, don't we?
We sure do. And we have two special guests. Who are they?
Kimberly Wallace from Game Informer magazine, the features editor, and also big RPG and Tales fan.
And who else do we have here with me?
I dwell amidst the abounding light of heaven. It's Victor Hunter, longtime Tales fan, a friend of the show.
Very much so.
Yes, this is part 1 of the Great Tales ranking. Part 2 should be available in your feed right away if you're a Patreon. It's patreon.com/bloodgodpod. The part 2 is available immediately to all of our $5 subscribers and above. Has the top 10 Tales games of all time. But if you want to wait a week, it will also be available to our free listeners next week. We already did the great Final Fantasy ranking. Kim, you were part of that as well. That was a lot of fun. It is the release of Tales of Arise, though, so it's time to take a hard look at the Tales series, a series we've never really covered in much depth on Axe of the Blood God. Well, we're kind of fixing that. This is where we're going all in. This is the definitive Tales month, I would say. We're getting all of the Tales out of the way here.
You are getting
September
an injection of tales.
All of the Tales.
All of the tales.
We'll get to the ranking in just a moment, but first, if you enjoy the show, of course, please leave a review on the podcatcher of your choice. Brightens your day, helps the visibility of the podcast, all that jazz. You can follow me on Twitter at @the_Capot. Nadia's at Nadia Oxford. Kim, where can we follow you?
Twitter, Kstar1785.
And how about you, Victor?
On Twitter at Victor E. Hunter.
And of course, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/bloodgodpod, where we do a monthly pantheon of the Blood God podcast. Right now, we're doing Tales of Vesperia, just in case you can't get enough Tales coverage.
Repeat!
Baby,
Woo!
repeat.
All right.
And
Ristel.
And of course, you can also get access early, a week early, to all of our podcasts if you're a $5 listener. We have lots of special episodes, the Summer of the Rings watch, interviews, lots of fun stuff. But let's get to the Great Tales ranking. Before we do that, what is our individual histories with the Tales series? Kim, I'll start with you.
Oh God, I'm going to share a story that I don't tell many people.
Aww.
So this is great content here. My first Tales game, bless my little heart, was Tales of Legendia.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm very proud of myself that was not something that stopped me from continuing on with the series. My whole life, people are telling me to play the games, and I was just like, finally, PS2 era, I was like, let's just get this going. And, we'll talk about it in the rankings, but not one of the best entries in the series to say. But then I played Abyss like right after that, and I got super engaged with the series and started playing like every entry and then trying to go backward into what I had missed. And then all the spin-offs were happening and everything else. So I have a great affection for this series. I feel like the characters, how it does character bonding, one of the best series for that, for RPGs in general, and really got attached to characters in a way I don't think a lot of series like pay attention to take those little moments. And yeah, that's kind of where it's been since then. And I did play Symphonia and all those things. I finally got it, but I'm like mad at myself that Legendio is my entry into the series. And so I'm shaming myself. You can come at me and be like, Kim, why?
We're going to come after you with the bell.
I sat there with Legendia with a strategy guide too back in the day, my paperback strategy guide, because that was like I thought it was some game that I was going to need to be a huge completionist with, and was going to be annoyed if I didn't. And
I think that's
Moses
a badge
and
of
Jay
honor.
were the stars of that game, but we'll get back to that later.
I absolutely think that's a badge of honor. That's not a source of shame. That's a like you entered through a less loved entry in the series and persevered, and I think that's very respectable. So yeah.
I agree.
Thank you. I was going back and forth whether or not to share that because I'm such a big fan of it, like of the series,
Sure.
and have been playing it for such a long time now. Even whenever I go to Japan, I go to that Tails store. That's in Akihabara.
There's a Tails store. I was in Akihabara. I didn't see a Tails store.
Oh my god, I have pictures of it. I'll send them to you.
Oh my god, that's
'cause
amazing.
It is a dream come true. Like, that was part of my favorite part of Japan, just walking in and be like, there's a whole store devoted just to
That's
this.
like
This is awesome.
It's like a pilgrimage. Like, people walk the way
Yeah.
of St. James. You walk the way of Tails.
That's where I got my Rapide pillow that I have on my bed,
baby.
and yeah, there's a lot of good things. But yeah, to say that's my entry, and I'm like, I'm just gonna be straight up with it and honest. It wasn't the best entry point, but I stuck with it, and I'm glad because Vesperia is one of my favorites too. Like I said, Abyss is really high up there for me. It's been a journey.
I think that rules.
Victor, how did you get into the Tales series?
Like a lot of people, I got brought in with Symphonia. I was a Nintendo Power subscriber, and Nintendo was pushing. I mean, they helped fund the localization of Symphonia in the first place, so they were pushing it really hard in Nintendo Power. I was also a kid who was very online in the 90s, so I recognized Kosuke Fujishima's character designs from Oh My Goddess and You're Under Arrest and that kind of stuff. So it was very like, synapses were firing and being like, this looks like something that I will probably like. So I got super into Symphonia. And then because I needed to know everything about the series, I, also dug into the backlog and wanted to learn about all the games that didn't come over here. And around the time that Symphonia was coming out here, Rebirth was coming out in Japan. So I looked up a bunch of stuff about Rebirth and was really interested in the fact that there's sort of like, there's 2D games and then there's also 3D games. And yeah, I just found it really compelling, especially because so little of it came out over here, that there was so much kind of interesting stuff to dig into. Since Symphonia, I've just been super into the series. I love it. I haven't been to the cafe or the store, but I have some glasses that were only available when the cafe opened for Tales of Xillia. It was open for like a very
Nice.
brief period of time. So I imported some. I have Mila and Jude drinking glasses and then a Mila and Jude mug. So that's sort of that's my merch collection, is just houseware. I adore the series, and I'm so glad that it looks like Arise is doing well enough that the series looks like it's probably going to have a bit of a boom and a bit of a revival. So I'm really excited about that and what that means for potentially re-releases of some of the older games, a new appreciation for the history of the series, and how so many like developers in the Tales series have gone on to either create other series like Star Ocean and stuff, or it just has there's Tales DNA in a lot of modern RPGs, and I think that's wonderful. I'm really excited for a bit of a Tales renaissance.
Nadia, you're relatively new to the series, if I recall correctly. Was Vesperia the first one?
No, my first one was the infamous fan translation of Tales of first one, Tales of Fantasia.
Nice.
And it was just, the translation was just like full of explicitives, and it just was absolutely nonsensical. But I kind of dropped that, but I appreciated the gameplay. I really enjoyed that. I didn't finish the game though, but after that I gave Tales a very, very long rest. Didn't really look at it. I'm surprised at myself that I never picked up Symphonia. I don't know why I skipped that. I must have been broke. That's usually my excuse for missing out on games at the time. And then I picked up Vesperia, the remake, which I really enjoyed, and then I just jumped over to Arise, which is a great game. And that's a very, very succinct but fruitful history, I suppose.
As for me, I discovered the series through Tales of Destiny back in the PlayStation days.
Nice.
I had a friend who was a huge Tales of Destiny lover. And I think it's still one of his favorite games to this day. It did not really connect with me in many ways. I think because I didn't really understand the battle system at the time. I was like, what am
Yeah.
I supposed to be doing? This feels a little clunky and a little slow. It looks a little dated. But then Symphonia came out in 2003, and I played it on the GameCube. I rented it on successive weekends. And my first thought was, this is neat. I got exactly what I wanted, an action-based but also vaguely turn-based combat system. That's cool.
Mhm.
It's very pretty. It was a very pretty GameCube game at the
Mhm.
time. And also, it reminded me a lot of Final Fantasy X. In fact, it felt like a wholesale ripoff of Final Fantasy X, which is something that the Tales series does really well, is that it basically lifts plots from other anime and other games and repurposes them, but in a fun way, in a fun and enjoyable and a very bubbly way. All right. So the Tales series, historically, kind of the third wheel in the kind of the RPG pantheon of Japanese games. You have your Final Fantasy and the Dragon Quest, a little more famous, but then there's the Tales series, which Bandai Namco has pushed hard over the years, has invested a lot in, and is never quite caught on in North America. Maybe because of its anime stylings, I want to say, and because especially when the Tales series was being heavily invested in and kind of growing, I would say that there's a real spirit of dismissiveness toward JRPGs in the
Mhm.
games media and elsewhere, which made it a little bit harder for them to gain traction, I would say.
Yeah, but I think that, like, kind of hidden status, like, gave it a really, really dedicated cult following, and you get that sometimes with, say, games like, Earthbound, which was another game which was kinda dismissed at the time, but people flocked around it because they realized, "Hey, this is a great game," and I think people were doing the same thing for Tales, because when I meet a Tales fan, they are a Tales fan. They
Mhm.
they know everything about everything. I'm kind of on the outside with the way I only know a few scattered games, but, no, there are certainly people who will tell you the history of the world if you ask them about Tales.
I mean, when such a small percentage of the games get localized in the first place, you kind of have to be a passionate fan because
Absolutely.
you play a game and then you hear that 3 more have come out since you played it, and there's nothing about them, so you kind of have to become that person who wants to dig and find the gems and find the unlocalized stuff. And
Kinda reminds me of being a fan of RPGs during the SNES era when you would play Final
totally.
Fantasy 4/2, and you'd hear, "Oh, they're already on 6 over in Japan, and we're not getting 5." So, it was kind of a mystery
Yes.
that happened over there, and we
Yeah.
had our games, and we had to deal with that.
Yeah, so that's what I actually find funny is when I was getting into the series, I was also writing for a fan site,
Oh,
rpgfan.com.
yeah.
And while I was doing that, I have a little bit different perspective on the Tales series because it was that like it was constantly like all these people say that these games are so great, but then Bandai Namco doesn't want to bring these ones over, but they brought over Legendia, and there's like all this discussion on how there were so many games that they wanted us to get and play, and we just weren't getting the ones, and they didn't feel like fans felt left out because they wanted some of these to come over and they didn't, and just knowing that whole ire of well, Japan's getting all like this, why aren't we, and what is this series going to take off? And I think a lot of you've had that feeling from fans that there was a lot of like love and belief like it should be getting more love, and they wanted to see more entries come over. It was just one of those things where I just remember all the conversation around it, and then finding out about all these games, and then I'd go over to Japan and I'd buy like the imports and be like,
Wow.
well, you know what, you didn't need that one. Because they're like, oh, I understand why you're upset about this one. Yes, this one would have been better. But yeah, that was kind of my history of going through it, was just watching people be really, really upset over which ones would come over and which wouldn't, and us not getting that Vesperia on PS3
Yeah.
was a big deal, I remember.
And we'll even see with the list we have today. It's not like Final Fantasy where all of those games are readily available to play. This is a list that ranges from has an official localization to has a sort of budget, not super great official localization.
Mhm.
Some have fan translations that are serviceable, some don't. Some you just have to play with a written guide. Like some have fan translations that are currently being made and worked on, and we might see finished versions of in the near future. So it's a real mix of barriers of entry for all of these different games.
Well, let's talk about what sets the Tales series apart from other RPGs. I would say there are three major things, and maybe Victor and Kim, you can disagree with me, but one I would say is the action battle system. Whereas
Totally.
other RPGs tend to have turn-based combat, the Tales series has always had a kind of a combo-based system. It varies from game to game how intense that is, but that's one. Another is the anime styling, perhaps much more so than either Dragon Quest or Final Fantasy, which are anime but have kind of their own house style. The Tales series leans heavily into anime. It tries to be basically a playable anime, which is kind of evidenced by the skits. It's exemplified by the skits.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, the humor and the cute casts. The people who love the Tales series just love it because it's so sickly sweet in many ways. It's over the top. It's a Bishonen anime, and people like it for that. It makes no qualms about being as ridiculous as possible. Did I miss anything? Is that pretty much what sets it apart?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but like it is those character interactions for me, anyways. I really feel like they go the extra mile to give you fun scenes between characters and watching their bond grow. And I love how the whole cast just kind of, they come together, but you're seeing why they work and become friends along the way, which I know sounds cheesy, but like, I like that.
Yeah,
I like
absolutely.
if you're going to save the damn world together, you better have some fun along the way and get to know each other and be friends. And I liked seeing the different, like, as those skits like brought out, some of them are really funny and humorous. And I always felt they just did such a good job with those character interactions. And if you're somebody who really likes watching characters bond and having like, they range too from like super like, just silly off-kilter skits to all of a sudden of like somebody will bust out a really like serious like confession about their life story, and you're like, oh my god, I didn't know that about that character.
That's the skits are interesting
to me
because
go ahead.
They can just vary so wildly between fun anime fluff to really deep insight into character growth and their ambitions and what this character means as a component of an ensemble. And I think that in general, that whiplash, when you talk about how like it is, there's a lot of cute anime fluff, it also goes into the grim dark anime edgy realm, and there's like the tonal whiplash in Tales is wild.
So here's how we're going to be handling the ranking. We're focused on the mothership games and their sequels. We're leaving out the mobile games, the spin-offs. We're not doing Radiant Mythology.
No!
Sorry.
Now, I want to jump out ahead of this because so I feel like I need to lay a bit of foundation here for how this works in the Tales world, because for a long time the producer of the series was Hideo Baba, and he was sort of very strict about having certain Tales games that you would consider like mainline titles. He would label them mothership games, and then you'd have escort titles, and those were spin-offs or crossover games or just things that were considered not integral to the main canon of Tales. This sort of got kind of set aside once that distinction became a little bit more ambiguous, because there were all of a sudden a lot of mobile games coming out, and the current producer did away with the mothership and escort distinction, and the games are now considered either original or crossover. So it shook up the Tales world. Believe me, this is a paradigm shift for the fandom.
What a twist! Perfect Tales moment.
Totally. Yeah, this is the third act twist where we discover that there was another world the whole time. But there's now we have these original titles, which means that Sorry, Tempest haters, but Tempest gets to be regrouped back in with the rest of the main
Gasp.
titles. And then crossover
No!
titles include things like the Narikiri Dungeon spin-offs, Tales of the World, and all the most of the mobile games. It seems like they're trying to make this next mobile game fall under the original banner. But anyway, that's getting into the weeds. But just so people know, there was a distinction between Mothership and Escort. That's kind of been altered a little bit to be original and crossover.
Well, we have 18 total games across two parts. Part 1 will be 18 through 11, maybe the lesser lights in the Tales series. And we'll start at number 18 with a game that was considered to be so bad it did not come over to North America and was demoted from Mothership status. Yes, number 18 is Tales of the Tempest, a game so poorly received it was never received a Western release. The RP Gamer review headline was, I was warned, but I did not listen. It was outsourced to Dimps, who did a pretty poor job.
Oh, interesting. Dimps is usually pretty on top of things. That's
Sonic Rush, baby.
Yeah, they can be hit or miss, I guess. So miss.
Yeah.
And the Tales series did not have a great run on the Nintendo DS, and that might be because they were trying to make it 3D, and maybe 3D games on the 3DS or on the original DS just don't tend to go very well.
Here we go. Are
Yes.
we getting into it?
Are you
Absolutely.
going
Get into
to
it,
defend
please.
Tempest?
Here
Oh, no.
I come, baby. Look, I'm going to be climbing up a lot of hills and dying on them for the next few hours, and this is the first
Love
one. Okay, I get it. Tales of the Tempest was the first DS Tales game. There's a lot of reasons to not like it. It is ugly. It is short. It doesn't do anything particularly interesting.
Like me.
Oh, Nadia. Nadia,
Hey,
be kind to yourself. You're not nearly
Don't
as bad
talk
as
about
Tales
my
of the Tempest.
friend like that.
I'm a little bit better than Tales of the Tempest. Okay, I can accept that.
I think Tempest has some redeeming qualities, and I think here's the thing. Tales games. Here's another thing. Hold on. Let me back up. I just have to lay so much groundwork for what I'm about to say. I am of the mind, ain't no such thing as a bad Tales game, baby. I'm gonna find ways to defend them all. But something about the Tales series that is a huge pitfall is something that is also wrong with the James Bond series. And here we go. They're long-lasting series, but every time it feels like they're always trying to check off as many boxes of what makes an entry in that series an entry in that series.
Right.
Which means that a lot of mainline Tales games have a ton of bloat. I think Tales and James Bond, every single entry in those series can be exactly 15% shorter. And because of that, because Tales of the Tempest is a shorter Tales game, I think that makes it, this is a comment that's only going to matter to like 5 people. Tales of the Tempest is the Quantum of Solace of Tales games, and I think in the next few years we are going.
Come on,
Cat's one of the 5.
Yeah. Too far, man. Too far.
Quantum of Solace was much maligned when it came out, and upon further reflection, I think people are going to come back to it and acknowledge that there
more like
are
a
redeemable
Roger Moore
qualities.
Tales game, one of the bad ones.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm not a huge Roger Moore fan, so I think there's a lot of bad Roger
Like
Moore.
cheesy as hell, bad production values. You're just like, going, what is going on here? You know, we could make if we're gonna compare all of these to James Bond films, I think Quantum of Solace can be a different one at a different point.
I'm looking forward to our journey and discovering where you decide Quantum of Solace lies in the
It's
Tales
not Tales
canon.
of Tempest. No.
All right.
This is one of the worst ones. Sorry. I agree
think
with
it's
you
worth
that
consideration.
I agree with you that it's really short, and that is actually not a bad thing per se. Like, I mean, people are going, "Oh, I want an 80-hour RPG." It's like, settle down. Like, Tales games have a lot of bloat. They have a bloat problem.
Yeah.
If we're going to be totally
Yep.
honest, especially usually in the last third or thereabouts.
Mhm.
So
Definitely.
being short and sweet is good. It's just the production values are really bad. The battle system isn't great. It's a half-baked RPG that doesn't make good use of the Nintendo DS. So I
think the battle system
Mhm.
is if a Tales game was Mega Man Battle Network.
Oh.
Make of that what you will. I'll let the listener decide what that
Lots of
Mind
means
random
to
encounters.
them.
Dead baby as the hero.
And
I'm just saying.
I I will also say something that I find endlessly charming about Tales of the Tempest is that obviously they did not have a huge budget for it. It means they didn't get the usual production IG anime opening,
Mhm.
but they try so hard. It still has a kick-ass theme song. Like every Tales game has a good theme song. And Tempest has an opening that tries to use the in-game assets to sort of recreate an anime opening. And it is, precious, sweet child.
Gets the gold star. It says you tried.
Absolutely. It tries so hard. And I find that endlessly charming. So that's, I'm going to leave it at that. That's Tales of the Tempest. That's more than anyone has ever talked about Tales of the Tempest. I rest my case.
Confirm.
I will say that Tales of the Tempest, I think, maybe is more bad based on reputation than anything, because
Absolutely.
people heard about it being absolutely wretched, and of course it was import only, so they didn't really get a chance to see for themselves. So it becomes, maybe justified or not, has become kind of the whipping child of this series. Kim, do you have a strong take on Tales of the Tempest? I'm curious.
It's got its reputation, but would you have wanted, like, I wouldn't have wanted a long, more bloat like Tales game on the DS. It's not.
I think they would have
I don't
been
know.
in much better shape if they had gone with a 2D approach
Yeah.
with
Yes.
Tales of the Tempest, because there's just so many bad 3D games on the DS.
And it's hard when they start a game and they just don't have like the budget of a normal title, and then it stands as with getting the expectations of, like, and I think people did have higher expectations than what was there, but I think they're excited to play Tales on DS, and fortunately it swung and it really missed.
I'm telling you, give it 5 years. DS nostalgia is going to be at its height.
You think so?
And we're going to see a reevaluation of a lot of 3D DS games for sure. Yeah.
It's weird that Nintendo DS nostalgia has not really taken hold yet.
I guess because it kind of blends into the 3DS, if you ask me. And that's not quite there yet.
For me, it blends in with the Wii era of very like white, family-friendly Nintendo, and I think a lot of the people who started with those games were a little younger, so it's going to take a couple more years for that nostalgia cycle to kick in.
But inevitably, it will.
Sorry, before we go ahead, I want to make sure that we address the characteristic genres and the names of the battle systems for each game.
Okay.
So Tales of the Tempest, part of the Tales marketing campaign is that they announce what genre the game is, and it's never just a JRPG.
Of course.
It is always an overwrought, and originally this was used in the development team as sort of like a guidepost for what the thesis of the game would be, and it's sort of become just a, like, as when a new Tales game gets announced, you get a new characteristic genre. So Tales of the Tempest is, and these are translations that I've taken from the Tales wiki, is a to awaken the soul RPG.
The fuck? the what?
It's
My
a
soul's
to
very much
awaken the soul
asleep.
RPG. It's like a Strand game. Everybody knows what Strand games are. It's a to awaken the soul RPG. We've all played plenty of those. It's our favorite genre.
That's true.
And the battle system, we'll probably get into some more of like the way the battle system is constructed and evolved from Fantasia. But this is the 3-on-3 linear motion battle system, or 3-on-3 limbs.
And who's our hero?
All right. Oh, that's a sweet little werewolf named Caius Qualls.
Aw, werewolves.
Yeah.
Our next entry is a sequel, the first sequel on this list, and it's a sequel to one of the most beloved games in the series. Didn't really carry on. Yes, number 17 is Tales of the Symphonia Dawn of the New World for the Nintendo Wii and the PlayStation 3. It is To Believe in the Resonating Hearts RPG, has a flex range, element enhanced linear motion battle system, or free limbs.
Sure.
Of course.
Let's
all...
throw a bunch of words together.
Yeah.
And,
we love these kinds of games.
That's what they do.
Yep.
It's very
in
Latter-day
Resonating
Square in the
Hearts.
way that they just make word salad.
Yes. Yeah, just make word salad. It's amazing.
This one hurts me, guys.
I'm sorry.
Kim, why does this hurt you?
Because of the protagonist. And I could not get, like, throughout the Tales series, there are some protagonists who are not as great. I would argue that this is one of the most irritating and annoying protagonists in the series, Emil. And I wanted to like this game so bad. I went into it all hyped up because I was like, yes, finally, sequel. It had the monster capture and collection, which, like, you put that in a game and I'm just like I want to play it, but what a disappointing game all around in so many ways. God, and it really does. It's like, I can handle bad characters, but even with being so annoyed by this, like, I couldn't even keep my damn Wii on to play it because I just, like, I can't deal with this. And I kept trying. Like, that's the thing. I'm like, no, you waited for this game. You paid full price for it. You're going to freaking play it. And it, like, it's not the worst thing I've ever played, but when you put Symphonia in that title and you say this is a sequel, like, those expectations are just up. And
there's a reason in the Tales fan community, you never call it Symphonia 2.
Yes.
Right. It's Dawn of the
exactly.
New World. It's not Tales of Symphonia 2.
I mean, I'll let other people talk about it, but just know that this one broke my little heart.
Aww.
And I kept trying with it really hard because, like I said, the monster it just thought, oh, there's got to be something here that's, like, gonna make me.
What's so bad about the protagonist? Is he just annoying?
Oh, he's like a coward.
Go ahead, Victor. Victor
Yeah.
did the side just as good as I did.
Coming off of Tales of the Abyss, which we'll get to, but it has such a strong redemption arc. It has such a good just character arc for the main character. And it also has a really mature, for a Tales game, romance.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Symphonia had a very juvenile, like, oh, the main character, he doesn't know she likes him. Oh, what a doofus kind of thing. Dawn of the New World doubles down on that and makes just the most juvenile main character romance in the world. It's so grating. It's so...
I hate that. It
goes nowhere. It doesn't serve anything. And there is a little bit of back and forth in Emil, the main character. His arc does have some interesting tension between his romantic interest, the female lead Marta, but it doesn't really end up being enough of anything to make them compelling, and it doesn't, despite the good things that happen with that romance, it doesn't overcome all of the annoying qualities about these two characters, which is really too bad, because the main villain's kind of cool. I dig him. I like him a lot. There's some good music tracks. There's one of the other things that's super disappointing is that the hook for this game was that the protagonist has a beef with Lloyd from Tales of Symphonia, and it was very marketed as like, oh my gosh, Lloyd has turned. Like, why is he doing this? What's going on? What's happening here? And the reveal is the biggest cop out in the world. It's
Ouch.
It's. I mean, I'll spoil Dawn of the New World for you. The reveal is that someone has the ability to transform into other people and went out and did bad things looking like
come
Lloyd.
on.
And it was like, come
so,
on.
I know, right?
That's so boring.
Yeah, that ability has never been in Tales of Symphonia. There's no precedent for that. It was just like someone happens to have this magical power. And
you just feel duped as a fan.
Yeah, of course.
You're like,
completely.
we expected better than that.
Yeah.
Like, that's really easy to do as like it's not really. Like, that's also
it's like it was all a dream of character development.
Completely. Yep. Yeah. But the battle system is great. It builds off of Abyss in some really cool ways. It makes for a lot of fun aerial combos. Like you say, monster collecting is very cool. There's some neat ideas. And I don't mind so much that they took away the world map, because you'd just be retreading locations from Symphonia anyway. So like they just sort of streamline it, and there's a lot of things that work about it, but it's so undermined by a lot of cheap plot devices and just unlikable cast, which is what we go to Tales for.
Of course,
exactly. That's
cast.
why it really fails for me. Is that very unlikable cast. Yeah. Voice acting didn't do it any favors either. and it's not good voice acting.
All of the
on North America side.
Yeah, all of the characters that come back from the original are underused completely. Like it I don't know. Yeah, that's too bad.
Major step back from Tales of Symphonia, and in some ways is very reflective of the Nintendo Wii at the time, because it was the system that would be having sequels to various GameCube games, but would be somehow worse, which is interesting.
I would always bum me out with the Wii was it was starting to get like all these RPGs, and like this was one of them, and I just never had fun playing RPGs on the Wii.
Yeah, it was not a great system to play RPGs because it felt very at odds with the light kind of gimmicky motion play of the Wii. It felt like the Wii was fighting against the RPG experience from the start.
Absolutely.
Which is interesting, because when we get to Graces, that was a battle system specifically made for the Wii Remote and Nunchuck, and it is regarded as one of the best in the series, and is the basis for a lot of subsequent battle systems that are very successful. So yeah, it's interesting. They just they tried to just make a game that could have been on any console and put it on the Wii, when what they needed to do was consider the hardware.
Yeah, exactly. If you could develop around the hardware, you could get some amazing games. Like Little King Story was just fantastic.
Yes,
I want that game to be released everywhere.
Man, no one talks about that game anymore.
It was like
and you just like, I remember playing that, and it was such a delight.
It was Pikmin, but not boring. And I know a lot of people are going to kill me for that remark, but it's so true. But that Mario Galaxy was designed for the Wii Remote. It was fantastic. And but if you tried to play something like Xenoblade Chronicles, if you weren't playing it with a classic controller, it was just forget it. It was so stupid.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. Anything else on Tales of Symphonia: Dawn of the New World?
Courage is the magic that turns dreams into reality.
There you go. That's hella true.
I love that we have you here just for those taglines, honestly. it's really making this.
I'm sure not coming up with them.
Coming in at number 16, I dare you to have an opinion on this RPG. Yes, number 16 is Tales of Hearts for Nintendo DS. It was remade for the PlayStation Vita. It is the meeting between Hearts RPG. The original had the combination aerial linear motion battle system, abbreviated perhaps as CNAR limbs, and its remake is aerial chase linear motion battle system, or the ARC limbs, because the remake changed the battle system quite a bit, and its protagonists are Core, Meteor, great names. Though I really don't like Core's character design. One of the worst character designs in the series, in my opinion.
He's pretty boring looking.
Mhm.
He's like
He has a
the
sword and a
perfect
bracer. Woo!
brown-haired JRPG protagonist with sword.
Brown
So
hair and tails, that is a sin.
oh, sure, yeah.
So it might
I
be
just-
a little mean for me to put Tales of Hearts below like Legendia and Innocence and that kind of thing. It's just those games kind of have interesting things. Like you could debate them. You could be like, wow, it's like this one has an amazing soundtrack or something like that. Whereas Hearts is just, I think, so middle of the road, so forgettable that it's hard to make a real case for it.
So I just looked this up because I was like, I remember reviewing this for Game Informer, on Vita, and I just typed it in, and the headline I have is "Missing Heart and Soul," and I was
that's
like,
amazing.
"Yep, that is true."
That's
Pretty
why we get
succinct.
paid the big bucks to come up with headlines
right,
like that.
right. I'm like, oh
Damn,
god.
that's good. So I put down Core Meteor and Shing Meteorite because this was an era of some weird localization choices for Tales games. So in the original, his name is Shing Meteorite. For whatever reason, Tales of Hearts R comes out. So we never got the Nintendo DS version, Tales of Hearts. We got the Vita version, Tales of Hearts R. And they renamed him to Core Meteor, which is, I don't know, a pretty lateral move as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, okay.
But, and this is, I'm going to get in the weeds a little bit again. When Graces came out, it was a big deal for the Tales localization community because it had a collectible card system in it. And all of the cards were named after characters from other Tales games. And this meant that for the first time, we'd be seeing English names for a lot of characters from games that never came out in English. And part of that was seeing the Tales of Hearts characters. Now, the female protagonist in Tales of Hearts is named Kohaku Hearts. And in English, Kohaku means amber. So in Graces, they localized her name as Amber. Makes sense, right? We're all on board with this. And Tales of Hearts comes out in English, they call her Kohaku, even though a precedent had already been set in a previous game.
Right.
So there are tons of weird things like that. And you know, all the different ways that special attacks have been localized in English where the names don't always line up. That's a whole rabbit hole you can go down. But yeah, Tales of Hearts has a lot of odd localization choices. And because it was a budget title for the Vita release, it doesn't have any English voiceover. So you're hearing people say Shing Meteorite, and you're reading in the subtitles Core Meteor. So there's a lot of dissonance in Hearts.
Yep.
I have to say, with a series as big and sprawling as Tales, you need that consistency in
Absolutely.
the localization. Like Final Fantasy is really, really picky about that, as they should be. The Bandai Namco should take a lot more care with that. Maybe they do now, but it sounds like back
I
then they
think
didn't.
North American releases were kind of backburnered with a few specific cases. Symphonia, I think, was kind of intended to appeal to North American audiences, for example. But as time went on and kind of budgets fell, I'm not so super surprised that localization budgets kind of suffered first. That said, I think things have changed again, and Tales of Arise feels like it was kind of designed for a Western audience.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it kind of gives me Dragon Quest XI vibes.
I do want to say,
because that was also very
Kat,
tailored.
you brought up earlier about the 2D battle system, how it would have served a DS game better. And Tales of Hearts on DS goes back to a 2D battle system. So the Hearts and Hearts R could not be more different gameplay wise. They are so wildly different as games, which is why I have to just accept that this ranking is completely arbitrary. I can't think about it too hard or I'll go insane.
I mean, so what you're saying is you would want to rank Tales of Hearts R separately.
I think I would, just because they're very, very different. Like Hearts is a 2D game. It has great pixel art. It uses a battle system that's kind of more like the Destiny remake, those sorts of games. And it is also really heavy on cameo stuff. So like when you're in battle, you're building up a combo, and then when you build up a gauge, you interrupt your own combo by summoning either like Lloyd from Symphonia or a bunch of other Symphonia or Tales characters, as well as like Cosmos or Klonoa, or like there's a bunch of
Nice.
Namco characters that are just in there as part of the battle system. So it's got this like fun kind of tribute to Namco history element to it.
That's pretty cool.
It's neat. And then the Vita version feels very much like they were trying to recapture the spirit of Symphonia, Abyss, and Vesperia. It has a very similar structure, world map, towns, battle system that is a variation of the linear motion battle system. And it feels like I say, just a wholly different experience. There was a fan translation being worked on for Tales of Hearts. They even released a demo that had the first little chunk of the game. But when Hearts R was announced to be getting an official localization, they said, so we're not competing with Namco, so we're not like distracting from an official release. We're just canceling it. We're not releasing it in any way, shape, or form. So there is a near complete fan translation of Tales of Hearts for DS out there somewhere, which might be worth visiting, but it's lost time. You challenged me to have opinions about Hearts, and god damn it, I had them.
Sure did.
Our next entry at number 15, Not So Legendary. Yes, number 15 is Tales of Legendia, where bonds spinned Legends RPG. It's just the crossover linear motion battle system, so not as complex. It only came out on the PlayStation 2, and its hero is Snell Coolidge, who is described as, by Victor, easily my favorite famous Coolidge. All right, so Tales of Legendia. Kim, I think you have strong opinions on this one.
I do. What a strange journey this game is. I don't even know where to begin, to be honest with you, because there's this weird plot where, like, Senel is in love with Shirley, who's technically, like, his sister, but he's an adopted sister, so they're not, like, really related, but they grew up together, and they have that relationship, and it's kind of... And Shirley is like the worst like damsel in distress character I've ever seen in my life, and she's really annoying. And Senel should have went after Chloe, who is freaking awesome. And that love triangle pissed me off because it did not end how I wanted it to, and I'm still mad about it.
Really?
And I have to talk about that. Oh, I get so mad when my love triangles don't end up how I want them to.
I'm a Groon
Chloe's
man,
just like
so
awesome, and she's next to Shirley, this like... They tried to make her marry Sue, but like in the same sense, like everybody hated her, so like it didn't work. And she's just like this goody two shoes, like I can do no wrong, but she's constantly getting into danger, and you constantly have to save her, and it's just so infuriating. And then at the end, because she can't have what she wants, she just like goes nuts and is like, "Oh, I'll just like, destroy everything." So sorry. I'm still mad about this. This was my first Tales game. And to say the least, I was very confused by it. But then I got really attached to some of the characters despite having issues, because like Jay and Moses are real cool, and they have these character side stories that they did in this that I really liked, because I always like learning backstories on characters and kind of finding out like they went to some interesting places. I'll give it that. But God, I have nightmares about Shirley to this day. The random encounter rate was super high, I remember. And it just wasn't very fun to play after a while. I remember the dungeons being blah. And I don't think it helped that it came out around... Was it the same year as Abyss? Or around that time?
Yeah, I think it was
so,
the same year.
Oh God! And
they really pumped
Abyss
them out.
is such a great... So I played Abyss after this, and like, boy, was it two different experiences for me. And Abyss is what really, I think, made me fall in love with the series, to be honest with you. But Legendia is just a weird title, one that like I question localizing this one over some of the other ones they didn't. So that's just my little rant, and I'm still bitter because Chloe was awesome, and I can't believe they did her like that. I'm still mad.
There's a reason that Chloe gets cameo costumes in later games and Shirley does not. You are absolutely right.
That's usually a good indication of who's loved and who's kind
Totally.
of
You
like
can
off to
tell
the
when the
side.
passion comes out with me because I'm just like,
Yeah,
why?
there's a sort of a fan distinction between Tales games that are story focused and Tales games that are combat focused. And Legendia, because it was made by a lot of like Tekken and Soul Calibur people, it wasn't the Tales studio. It was Project
I was wondering
Melphis.
about that.
So it's a lot of like people who have fighting game backgrounds, and I understand the intention there because a lot of Tales combat is built around fighting game principles. So
Yep.
Oh, absolutely. Like we had Eric Van Allen on our Tales episode, and he said that Tales
Yep.
is a fighting game. It pretty much is. And playing Arise, I can
yeah,
absolutely see
so
that.
it makes sense. It just unfortunately, as a follow up to Symphonia, which was very much a story and character focused game, that it just doesn't it doesn't scratch the same
Interesting.
itches, and for that it's a bit of an outlier. It's also
Interesting that they put both out at the
Yeah.
same time.
totally
Around the same time.
It's also interesting in that it's one of the few games that doesn't have character designs by either Kosuke Fujishima or Mutsumi Inomata, who are like the standard Tales character designers. It's part of why the casts are so lovable, is that they have these amazing designs.
Right.
And Legendia was Kazuto Nakazawa, who is more famous for Samurai Champloo, which you can kind of see in the
I remember
official
that.
art for
Yeah,
sure.
you can see that.
But it means that it kind of it gets forgotten a little bit, and not for no reason, because
Two things I want to draw attention to. First, killer soundtrack. Like one of the sneaky better ones in the series. And second of all, I find the post-game content pretty interesting. I like the idea of featuring a lot of kind of character quests, character storylines that really kind of shed light on individual protagonists. It reminds me a little bit of Macross, where the story seems to end and then you're like, but yeah, let's explore a bunch of characters. But of course, Shirley might be one of the most unpopular characters in the series. Is she the most unpopular character in the series, Victor?
Most unpopular character in the series might be Bienfu from Berseria. I'd have to think on that. Let me make some notes as we go along.
Keeping in mind that Legendia and Heart's Innocence, I think they're kind of maybe interchangeable a little bit, because they all kind of fall into a similar bucket. They all kind of got their start, or two of them got their start on Nintendo. They don't hold in the mind very well, I will say. But Legendia, so as a result, Legendia tends to come in for a lot of flack. Any other thoughts on Legendia?
Mm-hmm.
First main character who punches, not swords.
Coming in at number 14, it's yet another Nintendo DS Tales game that got remade on the PlayStation Vita. And thank God it's the last one. It's number 14, Tales of Innocence. This never came out in North America with an English release, but it does have an excellent fan translation, and there's one in the works for ours. This is the Connecting Thoughts RPG, has Dimension Stride linear motion battle system, and its hero is Ruka Milda. Ruka, not Luca. This is according to Graces. This one was developed by Alpha System, and its battle system is kind of a fusion of the Tales of Destiny remake and Tales of the Abyss with the added option of free running. Compared to Tales of the Tempest, this one made much better use of the Nintendo DS, in my opinion. But there were still a lot of, shall I say, compromises, especially in the world and everything. A lot of attention went into making the battle system great. The rest of it, not so great.
Innocence Also, great opening theme. Worth checking out. It's atypical. It's not a standard anime opening theme. But like it does have the DS version, excellent fan translation. If you're dying to play more Tales, it's worth trying. Unfortunately, it really it started a tradition that carried over into some of the main console Tales games that was really unfortunate in that all of its dungeons are just sort of like copy paste hallways in kind of a grid pattern, and it's the peak of like, you walked this way and you can see that it keeps going, so you better go back and walk the other way and see what treasure you missed.
Yeah.
Like, it's just
I know the type.
It's so just fill in the map. It's just guess which direction you're supposed to go, and it doesn't have any of the fun puzzles or any of the like really considered dungeon design. So it also does have a really fun cast, though. The story goes interesting places, even for a Tales game. It's all about reincarnation, and there's the main character is a nice sort of subversion of the heroic anime hero. And it's got a cool kind of steampunk fantasy vibe to it, which I really appreciated. Everybody looks like they're from Dickensian London.
Can't go wrong there. Please, sir, can I have some more?
Because the battle system is really based off of Abyss. The transition to the Vita version is a lot easier. Like, it's not as much of a leap as Hearts to Hearts R was.
Kim, do you have any opinions on Tales of Innocence?
I was sad this didn't come out in North America, to be honest with you. Like, this is one I think a lot of people talk about and feel like they missed out a bit. And I've played a little bit of the import because I have it, and I've liked what I've played of it so far, but I can't really comment like either way on if it was like, I don't think it was a groundbreaking Tales game by any means, but I think it would have been nice for us to have had the option to at least, play it. So I feel bummed that we didn't get it. But other than that, like, I don't know. Would people have had fonder memories of it if we had? I don't know. Is it going to be like one of those things that's more of like the one that got away, so people talk it up more? Because I have a lot of friends who played it who really, really like Tales of Innocence, actually. They always talk about it really fondly, which is why I went and picked up the import. So it's one of those that I'll always kind of wonder about more, and maybe one of these days when I don't have all these other RPGs calling my name, I will finish it, but
Yeah. The eternal
I know,
promise.
right?
Yeah. It's too bad that, because the original plan was to remake all 3 DS games for the Vita. We had Tales of Hearts R, Tales of Innocence R, and we were going to get a Tales of the Tempest R, because all of these remakes added characters that sort of tied into the other worlds of the other 3 games, and it was going to be the Triverse series. Unfortunately, Innocence R didn't sell well enough to justify the remake of Tales of the Tempest, so we'll never know. It's just sort of this evolutionary dead end that just sort of exists.
Just sort of exists. A good way to describe a lot of the games that we've discussed to this point. It's hard to have an especially strong opinion. Kim, I will say that I agree with you that if it had come out in North America, I think it would be better regarded. I think it's probably the best of the Nintendo DS games. It certainly does the most to make use of the hardware, one of the better looking ones. You could argue that Tales of Hearts being more 2D and everything might have an argument for that as well. But yeah, like, I think Tales of Innocence, at the very least, is a much needed step up from Tales of the Tempest, though that's not especially hard.
Innocence also has a really ambitious, kind of like a Gambit system from FF12. It has some of the best party customization, and in general, I find that Innocence translates a lot of systems from the console games onto handheld hardware the best it had ever been done up to that point. So,
coming in at number 13, it's the entry that started it all. Its number 13 is Tales of Fantasia, the legendary RPG. It gave us the linear motion battle system. Its hero is Cress Albane. It came out on the GBA, iOS, sort of, and also on the Super Nintendo, but of course it never came out here. Somewhat kind of a mythical RPG, but it doesn't hold up extremely well, unfortunately. But it does have one of the funniest dang fan translations in the history of RPGs, I would argue.
It was something else, and when I was younger and stupider and new to the internet, I thought fan translations were accurate. Like, I thought that these people knew what they were doing.
I trust them implicitly.
God, like, I'm sure I trusted them.
Totally.
Like, I straight up told my supervisor at work, because he was a big RPG nerd, oh my god, the real translation for Final Fantasy IV, there's so much swearing, they cut it all out in America. I made a real ass of myself, looking back. So I think after that, I became so soured on fan translations and how many liberties they took back in the day. And of course, there were exceptions, like Clyde Mandelin. He was working even then on games like Bahamut Lagoon, and that had an excellent translation. But when I played Tales of Fantasia on the Super Famicom / emulator, it was just like, I am being taken for a ride here, and I don't like it. I don't think the F word was originally in this game, and it certainly wasn't used to describe how this woman wizard has marital relations with other characters. It was just a mess, and I got so mad that I stopped. The one time I laughed out loud, though, was when you go into a town and there's like some nice people just playing some instruments, and you talk to a kid, and the kid's just like, these guys suck ass, all in caps. And I thought that was fantastic. That was the only time I really thought this translation shone.
I think Tales of Fantasia is tragic in that we just don't have a good way to play it.
No, we have the GBA port, which is infamous for the kangaroo incident, as I recall.
Yeah,
which
it's
just to summarize for our listeners, somebody used search and find and replace in their Microsoft Word document back when this was being translated, and Microsoft Word basically turned all instances of the word Ragnarok, which it didn't recognize, into kangaroo, which was, I guess, the closest match. So all these characters are talking about the War of Kangaroo, and you're just like, is this for real? Is this something that... And you're honestly baffled because you just don't consider this the very real prospect that someone who translated this game just had a beer at 12 o'clock on a Friday and left the machine to do everything, and just a real conundrum there.
It's wild.
It's wild.
I mean, Eric Van Allen and I, as of this recording, have an episode of Retronauts coming out in a few months, maybe. I don't know. But we have an episode where we go on a deep dive into Tales of Fantasia with Bob Mackey, and it is a fascinating game, especially because there's so many versions of it, and just that they've never seen fit to make those available to the English-speaking world is baffling.
Well, this was during an era where it was difficult at best to get a lot of Super Nintendo RPGs localized. It always felt like a little bit of a dartboard.
Yeah,
but they've had the PlayStation re-release was an opportunity. True. Then the GBA version kind of isn't the best way to play it. Then there's been 2 other PSP releases of the game that are there was one they released, Tales of Fantasia Full Voice Edition, which is based on the PS1 version, but they added voice acting to everything. And then there's so Tales of Fantasia did have a sequel on the Game Boy Color, sort of, called Narikiri Dungeon. And that also got a PSP remake. And as a bonus, they included the full version of Tales of Fantasia in it and added a new character. So there's the Tales of Fantasia Cross Edition. I sort of think is the best version of that game, including... it's got 2 more characters than were originally on the Super Famicom version, and it's super playable. Like, the battle system is very much like Eternia or some of the more updated 2D games, but we don't get to play it.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, because I totally understand why we did not get the SNES version, because it was very late in the system's life and there was a lot going on in that cartridge. There was no way they could have fit a translation. We know now that Seiken Densetsu 3 was not an option for translation here, because the text alone would have added so much weight to the cartridge that it just wasn't possible. Whereas here's Tales of Fantasia, which is another RPG with a ton of dialogue and an actual J-pop song and some voice acting as well. Like that, there's no way that's being localized for the West. Like, it's just not going to fit in a cartridge that's under 100 megs. But yeah, there were a lot of opportunities where they could have just said, hey, here's the original and it's all nice and buffed up and it's not the Game Boy Advance version. So I understand too where Kat's coming from, though. Like, it wasn't the greatest time for JRPGs.
And like Kat says, the Super Famicom version hasn't aged super well.
Interesting history in that it was Namco apparently went in and exercised a lot of editing over the development of the game, to the point that the development team actually got pretty frustrated. It led, I believe, indirectly to the founding of Tri-Ace, which gave us Valkyrie Profile. So thank you so much.
It led directly to the founding of Tri-Ace. The Tri-Ace is named after the 3 developers who left Namco to start Star Ocean over with Enix and then make Valkyrie Profile.
That's
so
awesome.
it was purely a fuck you to Namco.
That's what Tri-Ace translates to.
This is what I'll say about Tales of Fantasia. I think the story is quite cliche in many ways. It does not stand out from your typical 16-bit fare back in the day, but that's a lot of Tales stories. Sorry, Tales fans. But it was gorgeous for a Super Nintendo game. Lots of creative effects.
Oh, absolutely.
Very detailed backgrounds, detailed characters. The battle system is fairly clunky these days and moves at a slow pace. So in many respects, Tales of Fantasia is not the most fun to play, but back in the day, it was quite... it was very
so unique.
Oh, God, I hate seeing that.
And if you have a way to play any of the re-releases, they do play a lot faster and have aged a lot better. So they are sort of the more definitive versions of
Fantasia. I also want to highlight the iOS version, which was always online, had a huge number of problems, and then ultimately didn't work anymore and got delisted.
That happens a lot with iOS games. iOS 8 broke half the games. iOS 11 broke the rest of them. I can't remember if Tales iOS was the game where it was free, but you had to pay to save or something ridiculous like that. There was some RPGs like that on the iOS.
So they got rid of save points, a bunch of save points. They increased the difficulty and didn't let you change it. And then you had to pay to revive yourself.
Right. It was awful.
It was,
I cursed up and down
horrible.
when I made my review for that game.
It wasn't even that it stopped working on later versions of the phone. They just delisted it because it was hated so much.
Such trash.
Call it what it is. Bullshit.
It's absolute garbage. Absolute garbage. Just
that
the most
was
cynical
one of the,
cash grab imaginable.
I've played a lot of free-to-play games, as you can imagine. That's one of the worst systems that I've ever dealt with. I couldn't believe they were so brazen.
Coming up next, it's number 12, and yep, it's another sequel.
All right, here comes my time. Victor had his